but people love to say that prefabrication's faster. Now, I would counter that with, in my opinion, it is faster to install, but typically you have to pay your money early. Or would you agree to that? That you got to put your dollars down earlier, you got to pay for that design earlier, get everything built earlier. Maybe there's some shipping or however it works. So dollar to install wise, it's longer, but just install time, it's faster. Am I seeing that right, or do I have that mixed up?
Yes and no. So certainly there are like early release requirements for long lead items that you might traditionally not need money for earlier, right? So your cash flow requirement for a prefab strategy might require front loading of capital, right? But the thing that you can think about is your financial model for how you're going to pay for this construction. You might require additional capital up front, but you're going to pay less for that money because your construction time overall is going to take less time.
Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah, and I'm a planning manager for Intel.
My name is Blake Roskelley. I'm development manager for Clark Pacific, and I'm also on the board of directors for the U.S. Resiliency Council.
Brilliant. Today, we're going to be diving into prefabrication and pre-construction. Blake's going to be on the hot seat today. Blake, are you ready?
Ready.
Well, hopefully you've prefabbed some comments, if you know what I mean. Terrible jokes all episode long. Be ready for them, folks. So, Blake, your challenge today is you've been assigned to an owner's program, and the owner has typically only done stick-built type construction and is just starting to dip their toes into the prefabrication, pre-construction space. And they've tasked you with setting up a program. How do you go about doing that?
Awesome. Thank you for the question. And obviously, prefabrication is a very broad term and can be applied in a lot of different areas of construction. And my particular role is specific to really one small piece, but there's an opportunity to implement prefabrication strategies throughout the construction cycle of a project. And that can go from, kitting the electrical rooms and putting doing full modular electrical rooms. You can do your busways and electrical horizontal distribution. You can do that with mechanical across the board, even with your prefabricated hot aisle containment or with your prefabricated interior walls. And then you get to also the superstructure, and that's where my expertise lies. And what we do is prefabricating the structural frame and taking that off-site. And we can talk about the benefits of prefabrication and industrialized
construction. Well, let's make this a little more concrete. Yeah, I'm keeping with these bad jokes. Let this make it a little more concrete. So, exactly. So, you've been dropped in. You have, I would say, a team of executives to report to. You're basically working off nothing. You need to set up this sort of prefabrication, pre-construction program, whatever you call it. Where do you start and what do you do?
Well, we start by making sure that we understand that we need to bring in the trades that are going to be involved in the prefabrication of the different components as early as possible, and make sure that our design team understands the strategy and the goals of the project, and that when we are heading out into the process of designing, we have prefabrication in mind. So we're not going through a standard, conventional construction design process where we're going to, prepare the design team, architect, structural engineer, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, going to be designing in a vacuum and checking products that they might typically do without talking to procurement or talking to the trades. But we're going to get them in early with the trades, with your procurement specialists, with your supply chain experts, with product manufacturers like a precaster or like a mechanical and electrical sub, to understand what it is they can offer, what they can bring to the table, and what the design parameters are. Because if you start designing in a vacuum and you get down a path and you decide, hey, we want to do prefab, and you put some drawings that are at 100% DD level or in CDs, you're going to have to do a lot of rework. or you're just not going to do it, right? So
Okay. Well,
early planning, early implementation is important.
Yeah. So let's say, as part of your strategy, with this hypothetical group, you sat down, created a presentation, and to kind of summarize what you said and shove it into some presentation slides, you're going to sit down and look at what project am I pointed at first. And I'm going to throw you a nice little softball and say, let's say this project hasn't begun. I'm not going to use yours where they already have finished the design. You got to go back and rework it. But
Sure.
you've been pointed to a project that has already started. You mentioned a couple different components there, right? So you mentioned it's going to be a different strategy. You're going to need to probably change how you're designing it. And you're also going to need to bring in trades early enough in the prefabrication process. So let's kind of walk through each of those components to start out with, and think of this as, how you would execute this on a program. And so the first one I think you mentioned is design. I guess my brain initially goes to contractually, how you contract with the design firm. Does that change as well? And then how are you directing them, to make this the best possible process?
Yeah, the procurement method definitely is important in your contract and the way that you go about bringing on, your general contractor. And so getting a GC involved early and transitioning from a design bid build to a design build or even progressive design build delivery model is really ideal to have success with prefabrication, especially if you're going to go all in and do as much as possible. And so that means that your general contractor is going to be upfront and early with the design team, and they're going to help inform decisions that are made throughout design, rather than
what would be examples of some of those
specifics.
decisions that they'd be helping inform?
Well, I can speak to decisions that I'm integrally a part of, which would be structural system selection, right? So there's a lot of different parameters that go into determining what makes an efficient structural design, and whether or not you're going to use a traditional stick built structural steel frame, or if you're going to go to a prefabricated precast structural frame. And what I mean by that is not just the outside of the building, not just the skin or the enclosure, but the entire floor system, the roof, beams, floors, columns, walls.
Yeah. So why can't the engineering design firm? Why can't the engineering design firm just do that themselves? Why does the GC need to be present there to help them guide those decisions?
Well, the GC is going to be involved in leveling. So when you do a cost analysis, you're not going to go and just select one over the other without understanding the benefits or the cost or schedule differences between the two systems, right? And as an owner, you're going to want to have a third party that's unbiased, like general contractor, that's going to be able to level the different options and provide a side-by-side comparison between those two or maybe even three different options, and that can present them in a way that you can choose by advantage, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because some general contractors self-perform that work. And so if you are working with one of those, you may just want to be aware that that might not be an unbiased view. Okay, so that kind of tackles, the design piece of it.
Can I speak to that real quick, Micah?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's so run into that all the time. And that's definitely a challenge when you're coming in and you're proposing a way of doing things that eats into the margin strategy of a GC, right? They self-perform concrete, and you're proposing to a different material or a different product for the exterior of the building, and they want to do a tilt wall. Well, they're expecting a certain amount of revenue or margin from that activity that they're going to perform in-house. And so now all of a sudden you're proposing to take a piece of their pie. And that's not always something that they're very interested in engaging with, right? So certainly a challenge. And this doesn't apply just to precast versus cast in place, or on site, but it applies to all the other trades as well. If you're going to start moving things off site, you're going to take scope of work away from certain, subcontractors and different trades. That may not be something that, if a GC has a relationship with one sub versus the other and wants to get them involved and the strategy conflicts with that, you're going to run into potential, issues with implementing the strategy.
Yeah, that is an excellent point. Any tactics or strategies that you've seen recently used that help navigate that? Is that more of something you just kind of want to address in pre-selection? So you're going to go do this project. You know you want to go all in on prefabrication. And you just work to pre-select vendors that you know kind of fit that build? Or is there something, is it just notifying them early enough? What have you seen have worked in that space?
I think it's both, right? It's on the manufacturer to demonstrate the value that they bring, right? So it's our job to go to a GC that we want to work with and convince them that we bring value to them and ultimately to the owner. And so if an owner's out there and they're putting out to bid, and they're asking teams to respond to an RFQ or just an RFP, and you're going to put together a proposal and you are sticking to one solution. This is what we do. This is all we do. It works. We do it every time, versus a general contractor that says, hey, we've done it this way. We've also done it this way. And there are different parameters that make one solution better than others, depending on the direction and the goals of the project. And we can provide the owner the ability to make the best choice among multiple options. And so my goal is to go to be a part of that team and to add value, to say, hey, I'm going to make your proposal stronger to make the owner more interested in selecting you for this project. I can provide collateral, I can provide information, I can support you in any way to improve, the strength of your proposal. And so that's, one side of it. The other is to team up with a general contractor who already understands your value that you've worked with before, right? And so we're trying to get everyone to that point, but we're not there.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. We've talked about the design firms, the GC firms, and now on to the subcontracting piece of that pie. And so I kind of imagine you're putting together this essentially either kind of sales pitch or status update to your executive team of here's my strategy of how we're going to go execute it. And we're walking through, each of these components of how it would look. Get to the subcontracting. And I think you mentioned bringing them early in as well. And this is a construction podcast. So if you hear anything in the background, Blake sounds like he's on a construction site or he's got one heck of a home remodel going on, which we could maybe, I might edit this out. I might not. We don't know. I don't know. Did you give your son a drill for his birthday? But anyways, talking about the subcontractor piece, I guess why are they involved in the conversation? To what input are they providing into this pre-construction plan?
Well, so speaking from a precast provider, what we're going to provide is we're going to be able to provide design assist services early on, and so we're going to help in the development of the BOD, understanding what the programming requirements are for the owner. They may already have an LOI if we're talking about a data center with an end user that has a specific program where they have a layout that they like to use, where they're going to put their electrical room here, their gray versus white space, how it all lays out. And we're going to be able to provide input on a grid layout that is efficient for our system, and understanding what the needs are for that program. We can tailor a design that is best suited. And then with other subcontractors, and I know this from listening in on other trainings and workshops, electrical contractors have a lot of ability to do on-site, near-site, and off-site prefab, where they're doing electrical busways and conduit, and I don't speak the language, but have the opportunity to do a lot of prefabrication that requires early coordination, that if you were to get on late, you might not be as successful. And so I do know that this principle applies across the board.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. Switching gears just a little bit, I'm assuming one of these things in your update pack to this management team would include like a timeline of delivery. And from my experience, people always sometimes misconstrue, or maybe I have it wrong. So totally correct me if I'm wrong, but people love to say that prefabrication is faster. Now I would counter that with, in my opinion, it is faster to install, but typically you have to pay your money earlier. Would you agree to that? That you got to put your dollars down earlier, you got to pay for that design earlier, get everything built earlier. Maybe there's some shipping or however it works. So dollar to install wise, it's longer, but just install time, it's faster. Am I seeing that right, or do I have that mixed up?
Yes, and no. So certainly there are like early release requirements for long lead uh, items that you might traditionally not need money for earlier, right? So your cash flow requirement for a prefab strategy might require front loading of capital, right? But the thing that you can think about is your financial model for how you're going to pay for this construction, right? You might require additional capital up front, but you're going to pay less for that money because your construction time overall is going to take less time, right? So your bridge loan or whatever it is that you're using, your construction loan is going to accrue less interest. So you can look at it that way, right? But as far as
So I
whether
see
or
what you're
not,
saying. So like the duration, like, it kind of just, it's 10. Let's say the duration's 10, right? And in a stick built, it's just shifted further over to the right. So now you basically shift it over further left because that faster install means that's going to be off your books faster. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
right, correct. And there, if we start looking at a steel with a tilt, is the tilt ball load bearing or is it cladding? And so talking about if it is cladding and can you cast your tilt on the slab on grade, or is it going to be outside the footprint of the building? When do you need to start procuring your steel? There's a few different considerations for schedule that define when your procurement timing is. Now with like precast, obviously we want to be involved as early as possible, pre-schematic or the SD level. We're working with the design team where we're developing our shop drawings with the development of the drawings themselves. And so we're getting relief for our design and engineering as the architect is laying out the building. And then as we get to a certain stage of development of our drawings, we're starting to procure materials. And then we're setting up our casting beds and we're ready to roll even before, a permit is issued. But we can start casting, our critical pieces, our components that maybe have the largest number of them, that are a high make piece, that are a low complexity. We typically, it's not uncommon for us to do that at risk, meaning we don't have a building permit, right? That's very common. So we can get started early. And that's also that we can hit that ready to start, flying and hanging precast as soon as site prep, excavation, and foundations are done.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, that makes complete sense. So you've given that cash flow timeline. You've proved the executives wrong that you have to maybe put your money down earlier, and that's a negative. You've spun that to a positive. But then they ask you, all right, that's all great and grand, Blake. You've given me all the positives for this. What are some of the major risks involved with with this idea and this proposal you're bringing?
Asking me to talk about the risks. Let's see.
There are none. It's all great and grand.
No,
mission accomplished.
Yeah, I'm not used to coming in here and talking about the things that are going to go wrong, right? And speaking against the.
Well, that's why you're on the hot seat. You know what I mean?
I know you. Let's see here.
Well, we've talked about a couple already.
I mean, the risks are the risks are what we already talked about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the risks are what we talked about, right? Is that you really have to be engaged early, and if you don't, then you run the risk of stepping on your own foot because you've now got yourself into a situation where you need to coordinate, but you've already gone down the path of design, and so you have to do rework, and so you don't want to do that, right? That being said, and I'm countering that risk. I have been involved in projects where there was already a design that was at a DD level that we proposed an alternate system, and in 3 weeks we had the structural engineer vet the design, the GC vet the cost and schedule, and the owner make a decision to change to the alternate, right? So that can go fairly quickly if you have a motivated team. And there's a lot of motivation to move quickly right now with data centers, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can prove your value and if you can prove a schedule, you can get things to move pretty quickly.
Yeah, I feel like you just gave me the really solid, Michael Scott, what's your biggest weakness? I care too much and I work too hard.
A non-answer.
It's all good. No, I think I guess when I look at risks in my mind, I look at owners not committing to the decision. So I think I would put that one down. Sure. Where are we going to actually do this or are we not? Because if you stay in that analysis paralysis mode too long and you don't pick a lane, you're going to get to a point where you may eliminate prefabrication simply by the fact that like you've ran quote unquote out of time. You didn't get that design going early enough. You didn't, and the costs will start creeping up and maybe you're cost sensitive. So I think that's one of the risks that probably,
Sure.
I would see a lot on the owner side is just analysis paralysis. Any sort of, since this is a planning and scheduling show, what would you say on prefabrication, pre-construction, and especially in your space? And don't be offended, but every time I see foundations, concrete, exterior cladding, I'm like, this is just a counting game when it comes to planning and scheduling. What are some tips or tricks that you've seen or picked up or really like strategy-wise on the planning and scheduling and probably more leaning towards the execution progressing phase when it comes to installation of these components?
Yeah, so that's a great question because we can start looking at when do we start fabrication? How much can we overlap fabrication with install? And can we give ourselves, some flexibility in the way that we overlap those two? Here's one example of that. We can speed up the installation, right? We can add cranes and we can add a crew where that means we're consuming more product more quickly. Now, as soon as we start consuming more product more quickly, you think, oh, that's great. We're going to get done more, sooner. Well, that has impacts all the way through the rest of the manufacturing process. That means that now you need to double your logistics where you have additional trailers, additional shipping, you have additional considerations for on-site storage, so that you can have enough product ready to be consumed on site. But then also you have to have enough production going in the background to be able to service the need for product, right? And so understanding really and being in close conversation with the general contractor to understand their overall schedule and to understand what their critical path is to make sure that you can together develop a strategy that's going to be a best win, because there's costs associated with that. It's not just a matter of like turning on the spigot and you're just going to have product ready, right? And so you really need to have everyone understanding the implications of that and bought in.
Oh, that makes total sense. Do you see often that general contractors are simply just carrying milestones or activities that say, arrived on site or install, or are they trying to get into getting details and data about your production set so they can kind of start optioneering or potentially looking at some of those? Really just becomes a manufacturing question of, install throughput, those sorts of things.
So, initially when we're just putting together a high level project schedule, we're not getting into that level of detail. And certainly the project schedules that we get from the GC don't include much detail other than product arrives on site, topping out, and then you have topping slabs and other trades that are, and when they all hit in sequence. But once we get involved in working with the GC on creating a more detailed schedule, we get down to the nuts and the bolts, right? We're providing a schedule that's very detailed about exactly how much product's being cast, how much is being installed on site, what the sequence is for following non-trades. So then so what you do, if you have a multi-story data center and you're doing precast, you're going to have trades that are going to be chasing the precast as it goes up. So understanding when those hit in sequence, and you're creating an entire plan that shows the sequence of erection on the site. And it's all choreographed beforehand.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Well, Blake, we are coming to the end. I think the executive team loved your proposal. They're moving forward with it. They gave you the double thumbs up and a giant bag of cash to go crush it. So appreciate it. Before we take off for the week, anything you want to leave the crowd with?
I'll leave this, and this is a note on resiliency and the importance of considering that in design. I got to put a note on that, particularly in the mission critical sector, where continued operation of these assets is absolutely critical for the infrastructure that we depend on every day, but also for the financial considerations of the owners of these buildings, is that these assets are extremely important, and resiliency has to be considered, not just in redundancy of the electrical systems and the backup and all that, because obviously that's something that's talked about a lot, but also in the structural design. one thing that I've noticed that comes up a lot is how you design for using an importance factor, where they'll just scale up the demand for design. I'm getting in a little bit into the weeds, but what I'm trying to get to is there's a smarter way to go about ensuring resiliency. And you can go through and get a design professional that has this training to understand what are the components that are critical to ensure that is, if there is an earthquake and you're in California or on the the Pacific Northwest, or if there is a large wind event like in Texas recently, that you have taken into consideration these design aspects that are going to ensure that you're going to get immediate re-up time. Right? You're not going to have downtime for your asset. And that's one of the goals of the U.S. Resiliency Council. They have a rating system that defines the performance of a building that's very easy to understand for a layperson. There's 3 categories: safety, damage, and recovery time. And you get 1 to 5 stars, very similar to LEED and the Green Building Council, US GBC, in that then you get a platinum, gold, silver rating, depending on how you perform in these categories. But it's a really great way to make sure that the public and the owner, that insurers, that investors, loan providers understand, how that asset's going to perform. And I think that this is going to get more and more important as extreme weather events increase. So that's the last thing that I would say. Thanks for
No, it's great. We'll include a link. No, you can't have a data center if the floor falls out from underneath you. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in this week. We really appreciate you listening. If you could do one favor for me before you take off this week, 63% of our listeners listen but don't subscribe. Will you help me out and hit that subscribe button? It takes only a second, and it helps us build our following so we can provide you more value. We provide a lot of free resources out there, and we want to continue to provide those, but we need you to subscribe. So will you just take a moment and hit that subscribe button and share this episode? I know you know someone who is deep in the pre-construction, prefabrication space. They would love to hear some of these insights. So pop a link over to them and give it a share. From us at Beyond Deadlines, we'll see you next week.